The following is the procedure for public comment and participation. Individuals wishing to speak on agenda items must complete a sign-up card prior to the item being introduced. Those wishing to speak on quasi-judicial public hearings must complete a sign-up card and sign the oath. Sign-up and oath cards are available on the table. Individuals wishing to speak on non-agenda items may do so under petitions and requests from the public present. This opportunity is offered twice in the meeting, and individuals may speak at either the first or second petitions, but not both. No sign-up card is required. Citizens shall not comment on any issue more than once during the meeting. All comments except petitions and requests must address the pending issue, and citizens will be given 3 minutes to speak on agenda items. Next, citizens wishing to speak on the consent agenda must submit a sign-up card identifying the items of interest. Each speaker shall be limited to 3 minutes to speak on the entire consent agenda. And finally, all sign-up cards and exhibits being submitted to the City Council shall be placed in the box on the table.
The purpose of the City Council meeting is to discuss city business, and proper decorum must be displayed by all in attendance. Public input and participation is encouraged. However, all persons in attendance shall comply with the rules for meeting procedures and shall refrain from any action that disrupts the orderly proceedings of the council meeting or hinders a council from performing its duties. No person shall interfere with the rights of others to speak, hear, see, or attend the proceedings, make threats of violence, disrupt the proceedings with shouting, fail to confine remarks to the agenda item under consideration, nor continue to speak after the allotted speaking time has expired, as these actions shall be considered disruptive and disorderly. The mayor shall caution any person who violates these provisions and disrupts the orderly proceedings of the council meetings, and they shall be directed to comply. Any person who fails to comply, as cautioned, shall be ruled out of order, shall forfeit the remainder of their speaking time on the agenda item under consideration, and will be requested to return to their seat. Persons who fail to comply as directed shall be subject to removal from the council chambers by law enforcement or such other actions as may be reasonably necessary to enforce these regulations. Notwithstanding, the mayor may order the immediate removal of any person from the chambers who possesses a threat to property or life safety. Nothing in this section shall be construed to limit or restrict a person's right created by the Constitution, law, ordinance, or regulation.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the City of Titusville City Council Special Recognitions and Presentations Meeting, March 24th, 2026 at 5:30. I'll call this meeting to order. For the invocation, we'll hold a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you very much. City Attorney, do we have a quorum? Yes, you do. You do. Thank you very much. City Manager?
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and City Council. We have 4 items under special recognitions and presentations. The first item is 4A, a proclamation for the Water Conservation Month. And the Mayor will present a proclamation to a representative, I believe it's Ms. Gretchen Smith, from the St. Johns River Water Management District, declaring April 2026 as Water Conservation Month in the City of Titusville. And I'll go ahead and read the proclamation. Official Proclamation, City of Titusville, Florida. Whereas water is a basic and essential need of every living creature, and whereas the state of Florida and water management districts are working together to increase awareness about the importance of water conservation, and whereas the state of Florida has designated April, typically a dry month when water demands are most acute, as Florida's Water Conservation Month, to educate citizens about how they can help save Florida's precious water resources. And whereas the City of Titusville emphasizes outside water conservation by promoting the use of native plants and Florida-friendly landscaping principles, recognizing that planting the right plant in the right place reduces the need for water, fertilizer, and pesticides. And whereas every business, industry, school, and citizen can make a meaningful difference when it comes to conserving water, and whereas outdoor irrigation comprises a large portion of water use and presents an important opportunity for conservation. Now, therefore, I, Andrew Connors, by the authority vested in me as the mayor of the City of Titusville, do proclaim April 2026 as Water Conservation Month in the city of Titusville. I urge all residents and businesses to help protect our precious water resources by practicing water-saving measures and increasing awareness of the importance of conservation. In recognition of the 28th year of Water Conservation Month, this year's focus will be on ensuring that outdoor irrigation systems operate efficiently by using properly functioning rain shutoff devices. By making sure these devices are installed, connected, and working as intended, our community can prevent unnecessary watering, reduce waste, and make better use of the rainfall we receive. Signed, Andrew Connors, Mayor, City of
Thank you very much.
Andrew Connors, Mayor, City of Titusville.
Thank you. Go ahead. Oh, good evening, everyone. My name is Gretchen Smith, and I'm a Water Conservation Coordinator for St. Johns River Water Management District. The irony of the rain shutoff devices being this year's theme, we were a couple weeks before this rollout, and we thought, oh, well, if only it would rain. But rain is coming, and I'm responsible for bringing whatever's coming tonight. Just kidding. But in any case, having a water shortage in a good portion of Florida has been a blessing and a curse. The blessing part of it is that people are starting to pay attention to conservation. When you're told that you're not allowed to, run your sprinklers 2 times a week, and you only get to run them once. People are starting to think about what they might do differently and how they might conserve. We give out rain gauges all the time, and if you get a half an inch of rain, in one rainstorm, you can turn off your system that week. So, and that's saving 900 gallons of water. So 900 gallons equals like an 8.5-hour shower. So just little things that we can all do, shutting off the water when you're brushing your teeth, or men when you're shaving. The kids get it. Kids, we talk to children about this all the time. They know that they should shut off the water. They know that they should, wet their hands, wash their, and then scrub up and then use the water again. Adults are the hard ones to get this through to. So we're grateful for every April is Water Conservation Month. And I just want to encourage all of you to think more carefully about how you use water, both in and outside the home. And, conserving with the water that we have is a whole lot cheaper than going to alternative water supply options that are going to cost everyone a whole lot more money. So thank you for observing Water Conservation Month, and thank you, all of you, for all you do to conserve water. Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much. Can I get you to get one with this one too? Do you mind? Thank you. I get points for Thank you so much.
Gotta prove that you did it right.
Thank you.
1, 2, 3. Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Moving on to 4B is the fiscal year 2025 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. And this will be a presentation for fiscal year 2025, the annual report, annual audit of the city of Titusville, as presented by Mr. Zach Shalafor of James Moore and Company.
All right. Good evening. Zach Shalafor, partner, James Moore and Company. Let me make sure I follow the instructions here correctly. Why did I not go up? Auditor, not engineer. Oh, there we go. It's the on-off side, not the volume side. All right. Now I think we're good. So good evening. We are here to discuss the annual financial statement audit for the fiscal year ended September 30th, 2025. As always, I would like to start by thanking the council for the opportunity to work and continue working with the city. Big thanks as well to your finance team, Terry, Jenna, and the rest of the staff. A lot of hard work that goes into this process. I do like to kind of acknowledge that while we're about 5.5, almost 6 months after year end, This is in the world of governmental accounting, still a pretty quick turnaround time. Of the 45 or so municipalities that we audit, you guys are somewhere in that 10 to 15 range in terms of audits out the door. And I always kind of say that timeliness is a good way to kind of objectively measure how your finance team is doing in terms of being able to get financial information out the door, so that in this case, the audit's complete well in advance of really digging into your fiscal year 27 budget cycle here in the coming months. Before I get into the results of the audit, I thought it would be helpful to kind of dive into and really just do a quick level set in terms of the scope of the financial statement audit. Obviously, you have an internal audit function at the city, different items that have come up in recent months. So thought just to kind of say, here's the different types of audits, what our audit covers, what your internal audit covers, and what else is out there. That'd be helpful, hopefully, to provide this quick little overview of those different types of, basically engagements or audits that are out there. So I start with the financial statement audit. This slide is really there to acknowledge first that the audit that we perform is what we call in the accounting world a financial statement service. There's 3 different levels of financial statement services that a CPA firm can perform. An audit is the first level, and that really is your highest level of assurance with regard to your financial statements in terms of the goal being to obtain what we call an unmodified opinion that your financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects. That's, again, the highest level of service from a financial statement perspective. And really the process there's a lot of focus on substantive testing of the balances and activity in your financial statements. So when we look at your financial statements and we say, here's what you have in cash and investments, here's what your revenues were, really testing and proving out all of those activity to support what shows up in your financial statements. The other 2 levels or types of financial statement services are a review and a compilation. Those are lower in scope, so not going to focus too much there, but a review is an available option where you just basically, there's limited procedures such as inquiry to say that, hey, nothing came to our attention. And then a compilation is really just taking data, putting it into a financial statement format. Again, neither of those 2 relevant in this case. Generally, those are more kind of commercial, say, small business type engagements. But just to kind of share that first, there's 3 levels of financial statement services that a CPA firm can perform, and an audit is the one at the highest level there to provide, again, what we call reasonable assurance with regard to the numbers in your financial statements. So this next slide is designed to address some of the different types of audit engagements or services that are out there. Again, I kind of touched on the financial statement side, with the focus there being to express an opinion on the financial statements. We can basically say the financial statements are fairly presented all the way to we don't believe the numbers are fairly presented. Usually there's other extenuating circumstances that would cause things to go awry before that point, but you could have a disagreement over how something should be reported between the auditor and management. Not the case here. Pretty uncommon in the government space, probably more of a for-profit issue when you have a company saying, well, we think our revenue should be X for purposes going to banks or stock sales, things of that nature. But again, pretty uncommon. The focus typically, just being to obtain that unmodified opinion in the financial statement audit. The other types of audits out there, first one on my list here is a performance audit, also commonly referred to as an operational audit. This is really where I would say, the internal audit function pretty much is going to be living for the most part in this space. Of course, that role can kind of go look anywhere or just as needed, but generally speaking, that would be where I would say I see that alignment. Also, if you see stories in the news about, the Florida Auditor General is going into audit city XYZ, county XYZ, whether at the request of the local government or at the direction of the legislature based on generally somebody in the state House or Senate going to the Joint Legislative Audit Committee to request that the state perform an audit. Those audits that you may hear about typically also fall into this performance or operational category. And really the focus there again is much more just operational. It can have financial implications, or it can be purely non-financial, just looking at process, structure, controls related to non-financial areas. So again, kind of aligning that back to your internal audit, the internal audit function. Again, a lot more focus at, inventory controls, of course, things of that nature that don't necessarily have what we call material financial impacts, but are still very relevant to the overall operations of the city or any government that has that internal audit function. What I will note as well, just from the presence of that function, in local government for, the most part, kind of what we see with the clients we work with and across the board, the internal audit function at the city level is relatively uncommon. So it is one where I would say the city of Titusville, relative to many similarly sized cities, has been historically, I know ever since we have been working with the city, you all have had the internal audit function in place. What I would kind of say, ahead of the game, having that added level of internal oversight that many cities just do not have that function whatsoever. At the county level, it's much more common where you have a clerk of the court role that often pulls that in. But at the municipal side, again, I would say you guys are above average, so to speak, in terms of that, what you have from that overall process and presence, helping take a look from an internal perspective at some of those areas that aren't necessarily covered in a financial statement audit or otherwise. Working the way down the list here, there are audits that are focused on internal controls. Again, the focus or objective of a financial statement audit is to express an opinion on the financial statements and say these numbers can be relied upon. There are audit standards related to internal controls where the objective there can be to obtain an opinion first with regard to the design of your internal controls. So the auditor can say, yes, we have evaluated relative to framework and otherwise, and we believe these controls are adequately designed. Those audits can also cover the functioning of internal controls to say, we've performed extensive testing to basically support, yes, we affirmatively believe that these controls are not just designed well, but they are also functioning consistently as designed. Typically, those engagements are going to really fall into where you have third-party service organizations such as an outsourced payroll company, things of that nature, to say we're doing a lot on your behalf, and that provides some assurance when you have functions like that contracted out. But there are cases as well of saying, hey, we just want a very in-depth look at our internal controls and the functioning thereof to have an affirmative report back and say, are these controls designed well and functioning? So again, just kind of laying that out there as though that is a separate type of audit that's out there. And then lastly, the forensic audit. That's one, we kind of hear that get thrown around a lot, just kind of a buzzword in terms of, I think sometimes there's thoughts that any audit is a forensic audit, and it's really a very specialized area of auditing, typically performed by, there's a certification out there called a certified fraud examiner. In most cases, that's the type of firm or individuals performing these engagements. The way I really summarize a forensic audit is the challenge can be first saying, okay, what is the scope? Because once you scope and say, we want a forensic audit of XYZ, that basically then means that those auditors are recreating 100% of that subject matter. So for instance, our firm, we're not in the forensic audit space. We used to be a little bit, and when I was a brand new staff, we had a city where we performed a forensic audit of a $50 million construction project to build a couple of road extensions. And we basically went invoice by invoice of the total project amount and whether the invoice was for, a $2 million progress payment or a $2, tape or, pencils. whatever, if it was tied into that project, it was getting looked at equally to, again, have that 100% coverage, again, for more of that forensic basis. So that's the way I kind of conceptualize it, to say the challenge can be what is the subject matter, because when you're talking a forensic audit, you are looking at or contemplating that we're going to look at everything in this. So it really can be a challenge at times to say, okay, what do we want that focus to be? In a lot of cases, just from the cost and the scope control, because obviously when you're looking at everything, there's no sampling or other procedures involved in there, where it does take a lot more time and effort to work through that process. Again, quick overview, pretty high level. I can shift into kind of the results of the financial audit for the city, but maybe just right there, quickly stop and see if there's any questions on that overview. Again, hopefully that was helpful, just to give a little more background and context.
You're good.
All right. So from a financial statement perspective, again, the focus here being your financial statements, I always like to call to your attention and acknowledge is that the city does prepare what we call an annual comprehensive financial report. And with regard to local government financial reporting, this is really the most robust set of standards that can be followed. So what happens here is you have your what we call your basic financial statements, all the bare minimums to meet the state statutory reporting requirements. All of those, of course, are in here. The GASB, or Government Accounting Standards Board, does provide a framework for an ACFR, or an annual comprehensive financial report, which in there's additional items, the transmittal letter that kind of paints an overview of the city, as well as some expanded supplementary information, all of your budgetary comparison schedules, as well as in the very back, there's what we call your statistical section. That includes 10 years of historical, financial, non-financial data, just looking at, what have your revenues and expenditures been over the years? Who were your largest taxpayers? What was your employee count? What some of your key, police and fire data in terms of calls received and otherwise. So I always like to point that out just in general as an interesting place to look and just learn something new in terms of saying, well, how has the city of Titusville evolved over the last 10 years? That document every year is submitted to the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, for evaluation to say, did the city follow all of those required aspects relative to this level of reporting? If so, the city is awarded what we call a Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. We have last year's certificate on this slide here that does go into the current year statements. Staff, once again, will be submitting that to the GFOA. We would expect this year's document to receive that award once again. So with regard to the audit reports, these financial statements, I do want to also acknowledge, are prepared in their entirety by staff. We have many clients where we kind of prepare everything, pull it together with staff's numbers. But in your case, your team prepares the entire document, and then there's the 5 reports from us that get inserted into this. So that's just another one from an internal accomplishment that I think is always worth sharing. The number of clients we have that prepare their own financial statements in totality, I think I could probably count on one hand, if not definitely on 2 hands. So our audit reports, the first one, this is the audit report on the financial statements, showing up towards the very front of the document. As I mentioned before, an unmodified opinion is the best opinion that you can receive. We did issue that opinion like in prior years, stating that we believe these financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects. The second report is on internal control and compliance. And as I mentioned, this is not an internal control audit. There is no opinion on internal controls as a whole, but we do have to understand your internal controls as it relates to financial reporting. So the key areas of focus I would kind of say there is just, your overall accounting, including journal entries, where you do have kind of a risk of error or override because of the manual nature of those. So we always have a lot of time focused there on the journal entry process. Bank reconciliations, of course, just a fundamental, how you track all of your cash in and cash out and reconcile those every month. And then transactionally, a lot of the focus, again, thinking about where we have movement of dollars, going to be on your payroll process, accounts payable, getting bills paid, and then on the revenue side as well, a big area there being, utility billing to say, are your rates properly entered into the system? Are bills calculating correctly? So we do spend a lot of time in those areas first to understand what are these controls and say, do we believe that they are appropriately designed, or do we have any areas of concern that we said, hey, you've got this one person handling the entire process, there's an opportunity for error or otherwise to go undetected. Those could be elevated if we had any such situations identified. Also, even though we understand your controls, if in our testing we come across any situations where we see there was an error or an override in some of those key financial processes, those could rise to the level of being reported in this report, and we had no such items identified here. The single audit report, as in most years, the city is typically over the threshold for a federal single audit as well as a state single audit. And what that means is when you're over that threshold, we have to also perform effectively a mini compliance-oriented audit over your major grant programs. This year on the federal side, it was your ARPA funds. On the state side, related to some DEP revolving fund loan proceeds. We did focus, again, compliance testing on those two grant programs, both with regard to were you in compliance, but also what were your controls to help ensure compliance in those expenditures and otherwise, and we had no comments to report there. And then the last two reports that we issue are kind of a catch-all state-specific requirements by the Florida Auditor General. The focus here is typically on financial condition, if there were any red flags financially, such as you couldn't make payroll, you had what we call a financial emergency, or if you were trending in a continued negative capacity. There's certain red flags that we would have to effectively notify the state in this report for them to be aware. There were no such items noted, no modifications in that fourth report. And then the final report, we have to look at the city's compliance with state statutes related to investments and investment policy items. And there we did note the city to be, in our opinion, in compliance with that statute. And also note, as in prior years, we do issue a separate audit report for the CRA. The numbers are already in the city's financial statements, so there's really no change from the reliability of those numbers, the opinion on those numbers. But in that CRA audit, there was also an examination report relative to the use of those dollars, where we do perform a lot of testing on the expenditures in the CRA to say, were those in line, in our opinion, with state statute and the CRA plan, and we had no exceptions identified in that report as well. So looking at your fund balance, every year I like to do a quick trend and see what have the changes been in recent years in your total fund balance, that being your assets minus liabilities in the general fund. And you can see here a bit of an increase from the prior year that really relates to closing out some of your capital projects funds back into the general fund. And really the focus of where I like to look is in those bottom two buckets, what we call your assigned and your unassigned fund balance, because those really represent the unrestricted residual reserves that you have in the general fund. You do also have in that committed your stabilization and disaster reserve. So you've got that added intentional reserve that's been set aside based on council directive. But once we back that out along with any restricted fund balances, the assigned and unassigned is really what's left over. Again, kind of no strings attached or no restrictions attached to those reserves. And as in past years, I like to compare those two buckets to what you spent in the current fiscal year, just to help put it into perspective. So you can see on this slide, when you look at that assigned plus unassigned fund balance relative to what you spent, you're at about 15%, so just under 2 months in reserves. The GFOA does recommend a bare minimum of 2 months. So while you are slightly below that, when you factor in that committed fund balance related to the intentional set aside for your stabilization disaster reserve, you get back into the 25 to 30% range. So really a solid, a little bit over 3 months in reserves when we factor that in. And this 2-month recommendation is a bare minimum recommendation. GFOA and their best practices basically say, you should be at a minimum of 2 months, but consider all sorts of other factors. The big one, of course, for anyone in Florida is the susceptibility to natural disasters, talking about hurricanes and otherwise, and the fact that in most cases over the years, when there's a major impact from a hurricane, it can be a couple of years before some of those dollars start to trickle back in from FEMA. So it really, a lot of it is tied into how resilient is the city in terms of being able to handle any of those unforeseen hurricanes or any other unexpected financial challenges. Looking at your unrestricted net position in your enterprise funds, here I always like to look year over year and just say what direction are these funds trending. These, of course, are all generally your charge for services revenue funds. What I've noted in prior years here, looking at first solid waste, stormwater, and marina, all of those continue to just show a negative because we do allocate some of your pension liability and your OPEB liability. If you were to ignore those and say operationally, from a cash standpoint, where are we? All of those would be positive. So while it shows negative, it's really due to those non-cash adjustments tied into those long-term pension and OPEB liabilities. Water and sewer, pretty substantial decrease. It's not one where, there are operational losses. What that relates to is some pretty significant capital investments in that fund in the current year being paid for out of those reserves. So again, from that one-time nature use for a capital project, no concerns. What I always just like to say is the numbers really tell half the story. The real focus in the water and sewer space really ties into, what are the upcoming future capital needs? Where do the rates need to be to ensure that as any future needs come up, are they grant funded? Are they debt funded? What does that look like? That puzzle is kind of always being looked at as you all go forward, which we've seen to be the case in the past. And then lastly, I always like to touch on the pensions and OPEB, as I mentioned. And what we see here is for your general plan and your police and fire plan, those unfunded liabilities or net pension liabilities did increase a little bit from the prior year. Both of those still at that 90% mark or better. And again, I always like to say these are just point-in-time measurements. So based on the way the market's gone the last few months, these numbers would probably all be a little bit lower if there was to be a separate valuation at this point in time. OPEB really can move pretty drastically just based on interest rates, but that I know continues to be an area of focus to ensure that you all, have a good plan going forward. And really, in these two areas, I like to just always emphasize is it's a moving target. It's really about the long game to say, okay, what do we see the cost being in future years? How are we set up to be able to handle that cost, and whenever a decision point comes up to really say, okay, you're never as good as you look and you're never as bad as you look as these numbers move up or down. It really is one that you always want to kind of look at and say, what's the long term going to be over the course of years, if not decades, with any decision points on any of these fronts. So that's probably the slightly more long-winded than usual version of this, but as always, thank you all for the chance to be here, and I'm more than glad to answer any questions or dive into anything deeper.
Thank you very much. Any questions from council? Member Moscoso?
I have a few questions, so if anybody else has like one question they want to go first.
You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. First, I will say thank you. I really appreciated meeting with you this morning. One thing to our city manager, I would ask that when we get this on the agenda, if we could have the documents ahead of time. We were given one sheet of paper that said there would be a presentation, and this isn't, I know that you sent your information and your things in, but that report was 200 pages. We didn't get it until I requested it, and also the presentation, if you see how much information is on there, it would be helpful if we had time to look at that in advance. So if we can work on that, I think that would be good. So I threw you some softballs this morning. I'm just kidding. You did a great job. So in our conversation, you mentioned that you already receive our internal audits. And so can you explain how you factor, and you didn't receive our latest internal audit, but can you explain how you factor those internal audits into your process of the external audit? Because obviously you are looking at them as you're preparing.
Yep. Yeah, so every year as we are going through kind of our planning phase of the audit, typically in the, late summer, early fall, We'll obtain anything that was issued throughout the course of the year to factor that into what we call our risk assessment. So all audits have to, basically go through a risk assessment process where we have some standard risk areas that we always document, but also, just consider, what's going on differently. Are there any areas of concern that have come up throughout the year? And then, we would factor that into or consider as part of our planning to say, hey, what do we want to do differently this year? Do we want to do some additional testing, what we kind of call unpredictable testing, in a different area in a given year? So for instance, I know in the internal audit, there was, some items on purchasing card activity. And that's one that, we've seen a lot of just focus in general, many cities, that kind of coming up as an area of question, and been a common one that we've lumped into different plans at times, saying, hey, let's go do a deeper, look at purchasing cards or whatever transactional area, even though in most cases it's not, say, required to get to the point of saying the opinion's clean on the financial statements, but still saying, just kind of what other, say, qualitative issues or concerns might be out there that we aren't expressing an opinion on, but still want to just do a cursory look and say, hey, it seems like there could be some concerns or issues in this area. Let's go ahead and do some additional testing from our standpoint, just to get a general comfort level, or say, hey, we saw issues in this area either as well, or if we have any different results from our testing.
And you mentioned that you look into utility billing beyond just the general financial review, but based off of the internal review that we had, what would you do differently for next year? What would you possibly be looking into that you didn't this year?
Yeah, so I think definitely, purchasing cards would be one that, from reading through the report, would be one, probably deserving of some additional attention, as well as just, a lot of it from the capital asset side. I know there's been questions, concerns there, just, really kind of honing in, okay, what are the procedures in terms of who's responsible for inventorying and looking at, and, even to the point of, say, just understanding kind of, what are all the communications related to some of those different areas in terms of asset management, purchasing card oversight, because what you run into, I think, is the balance of decentralizing some of those controls at times and oversight. The trade-off is you're probably a little more agile in terms of being able to just get work done, but there's a trade-off. And with that trade-off, oftentimes it can be, well, what's the oversight mechanism to ensure that, hey, if department heads are responsible, for overseeing, their employees' purchasing cards, and then you get into the asset management to say, okay, well, does everybody understand their role in the process, and being fully kind of aware of, well, hey, no, this is what it means and what you are responsible for, even though sometimes maybe to different people it can kind of be like, oh, well, it's fine, I know this person's doing what they're supposed to do, but that responsibility, just like any other internal control, still really rests with who is that second set of eyes. So I think, where I can see, again, some of it not even being so much in the testing, but the understanding of the controls to say, okay, well, is everyone fully aware of what the critical nature is of their role in this process? Because we always like to say about internal controls is, collusion, not that there's any collusion or anything of that, I'm suggesting, but the fact that you've got two sets of eyes. So if two people said we are both in this to say this isn't being followed, that pretty quickly negates that control. But there can be times where it's not collusion, but just the person in that oversight role might not fully understand what their role is in that process. And I think that's where I could see we would probably kind of want to get a feel for everyone in that process. What's the understanding? Is there any sort of training that could, further help, just enhance that control environment for those that are in roles of importance that maybe, may or may not have, given it that full thought of saying, oh, wait, this really is on me to be the clearinghouse for these transactions, or, the oversight of physical assets.
Perfect. And then I think I expressed this to you. My question was, first of all, I know you're up here, and I was like, I don't want to drag you down into the weeds of the internal audit, but obviously that is something that is very recent. But my frustration has been is every document we receive always says everything is fine. And it's obvious not everything is fine. So I'm just trying to reconcile that. You did mention in your presentation that this is prepared by the staff. And so what kind of value does your company offer us moving forward if staff is preparing, if we've had all these audits and things aren't really coming up? I mean, moving forward, how are we going to prevent any of this, and what suggestions do you have for us?
Yeah, so I think from a preventing the challenge, from a lot of just in general internal controls, there's always a cost benefit consideration. And I think that's, because to some degree, there is a reliance on people doing the right things, following process and otherwise. Not to say that you can't implement controls. I mean, you can't get to where you are zero fail safe or otherwise in terms of absolutely nothing can go wrong, because all it takes is one person that just isn't in the position they should be to understand or otherwise. And, the more that you put that into effect, the more of a cost that you have associated with it. So there is always going to be that kind of balance. The example, I think we may have discussed and with some others is, to say, okay, you could have talking about physical inventory controls, let's say, just, that being one of the issues that was identified, you could say we are going to centralize all physical assets, inventory or otherwise, at City Hall, and, you hire a couple people to manage this. And the trade-off becomes, you have further mitigated that risk of, we'll call it loss, whether it's due to fraud or error, it doesn't really matter. We don't want waste at the end of the day, or you all don't want waste. None of us do. You can mitigate that, but then you're saying, well, what's the cost of having that, both in terms of the people running this, inventory control department, we'll call it, and then you also have the lost productivity from everybody having to check things in, check things out, as well as potentially from the citizen side, not being as timely in certain instances. And that's just, again, a general example, but it's a challenge, I think, to really say, how do you balance everything? Because certainly you don't want anything to go wrong. How do you prevent it? And it's, like any internal control, it's, not 100% preventable or foolproof. Again, I will echo kind of what I said before, that having the internal audit function, you guys are already steps ahead of many other, probably most other similarly sized cities in terms of having that resource. Because I think a lot of what we see just in general of internal controls is there's what we call preventive controls and detective controls. And the preventive side is, okay, well, what is discouraging somebody from not doing the right thing? If I got my negatives there right. But to basically say, if there's a security camera watching you're going to be less apt to do something you shouldn't do with that camera because it's on camera type of thing. So having that function, again, you're already a step ahead of the game because there is that added oversight versus in some cities, if you don't have that, there could be more of a attitude amongst the bad apples that say, oh, well, no one's going to be looking at this or otherwise, and they feel more emboldened to do whatever they might do. So I think that already is a huge step to just maintain that. And I think again, probably I would say education is one of the bigger areas to kind of understand where were the breakdowns from those who potentially should have known and said, okay, well, if these assets were going missing, who else should have been eyes on this situation to help identify that and understand that? Well, why was there a disconnect there? Was it didn't want to say something? Was it didn't understand, didn't realize? And I think kind of to me, it's understanding where some of those breakdowns potentially were that would have helped identify. But again, there is always going to be some degree of a risk to say things could go wrong if you get somebody who does the wrong thing at any point in time.
Member Nelson, did you have anything?
I did, but Member Moscoso stole my thunder. But that's okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here, Mr. Zach.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
City Manager?
Yes, sir. Moving on to 4C, Brevard County Space Coast wastewater system expansion feasibility report. And the Brevard County Utility Services Department will present an update to the Space Coast wastewater system expansion feasibility report.
Got it. Hello, everyone. Allow me to introduce myself. My name's Eddie Fontanen. I'm the Utility Services Director for Brevard County. And to my right, I have Sarah Mars from Jacobs Engineering. I'm going to let Sarah take over, but just to give you a little overview, you know, I'm sure you all know there's a lot of discussion going on with the space industry as it relates to, believe it or not, wastewater. And with that being said, Brevard County has stepped up to take the lead during the efforts of what Sarah's going to describe, of what's described in a phase 2. In the phase 1, which is an extremely high-level report, and I say that because it was a good starting point, but this is why we're working on phase 2, which is what Jacobs Engineering is taking lead on. There was mention in the report related to the dynamic of Titusville about being part of the network, if you want to say, of regional wastewater. So with that being said, I'm going to allow Sarah to kind of update you. I hope we do this in a somewhat brief sense, but please, we encourage any questions that you have.
Thank you. Good evening, council members. Thank you for having us today. It's a pleasure to be with you. So we're going to give you a little bit of an introduction to the project, and then the reason why we're here today is to discuss City of Titusville's desire to participate in the project. Where am I pointing at here? Okay. Okay, so the project as it stands is a feasibility report, and it is looking at the options and recommendations regarding to expanding the system's capability and capacity in Brevard County. And so as Eddie says, Brevard County is leading this study, and so we are studying the capacity that is within their system today. There are a lot of factors that are going into the need to expand an upgrade, and that includes everything from population growth to growth within the space industry, and additional commercial expansion that is occurring in the area. So this feasibility study is going to provide recommendations to support not only the growth within Brevard County, but it's meant to include a solution that is going to fit within that system as a whole. And so because of that, we anticipate that the recommendations that come out of this report are going to include things like upgrades to existing facilities within the county system, as well as a new regional advanced wastewater treatment facility, or AWWTF, if you hear that acronym. And so that report is going to include the recommendations for that, as well as a phasing timeline for laying out those changes. And so why we're here today, as Eddie started to mention, is that this is not the first step that's been done looking at this issue. There was a report that was done by Black and Veatch, published in 2023, that took a high-level view at some of the needs that would be some of the changes that would need to be done for accommodating some of the commercial space industry growth in particular. And within that, it listed some key stakeholders that it recommended be part of the continuing study. And so our due diligence that we are doing with Brevard County is going to each of those stakeholders and wanting to know if they are interested in participating in further with this study. And so as you can see here, those stakeholders include the Economic Development Council of the Space Coast, Space Launch Delta 45, which is the wing command at Cape Canaveral and Patrick, NASA at Kennedy Space Center, and Space Florida, and the city of Titusville. And so why we are here today is to tell you about the project a little bit more and bring to your attention the ability to decide if you would like to participate in the study. I do want to note for you here that the way we define participating is that you would attend stakeholder meetings with the project team. You would provide data and input if requested. And it does not necessarily mean that the city of Titusville is saying that they are committing as a user into Brevard County's wastewater system. So that is two separate definitions there, in case you're wondering. Participation in the study is what we're here about today. So the project goals, again, just very briefly, are to fortify the system so that it can withstand some of the increasing climate activity that we're seeing that place stress on the system, support the expanding commercial and industrial and population growth that is occurring within the county, making sure that the critical infrastructure within the county is really meeting the growing demands, and then, of course, accommodating a lot of that future space launch growth that we're seeing at the Cape. Oh, and I'm sorry, also benefiting the Indian River Lagoon is a key goal for the study as well. Okay, so the timeline for the study, we started last year, and we will be concluding our report at the end of this calendar year. So December of 2026 is when we intend to publish the findings and recommendations within the report. As you can see here, we are moving through, we're about halfway through a lot of our tasks within the study itself. The project is organized into a series of tasks, as you saw in that previous slide, that we're running concurrently. And the reason for this is because, again, this is not the first study to identify wastewater needs as being critical to this area and the growth that is anticipated to continue here. And so you can see that, again, that population growth, the industry growth, and some of the capacity findings that are currently here have already inspired other plans that are recommending updates to wastewater systems here. And so for that reason, this report is not only going to address some of the short-term questions, it's also going to look at long-term solutions for Brevard County. So when I talk about, what we're doing within different tasks, sometimes we were looking at answering one or two specific questions. Sometimes we're working towards getting to that long-term recommended solution. And so therefore you see here we are looking at site selection for a new regional AWWTF. We're looking at pipeline routing that comes with putting that into the system. We are answering questions about reverse flow evaluations in some specific cases. And then, of course, all of that wraps into the final report. Again, our due diligence started with looking at that first report that was done, performed by Black & Veatch, published in 2023. And again, as Eddie says, that was a very high-level report looking at one or two components that were needed in the very short term. And so part of our due diligence within this Brevard County study was understanding, not only the goals of that study, but what can we do to take the deeper dive and to look at a more holistic approach to a longer-term regional solution. And so just to give you a very brief update on the tasks that we are currently running within the project, our reverse flow evaluation looked at a pipeline between Kennedy Space Center and the Cape Canaveral Regional Wastewater Treatment Facility on the installation. It was answering a question of whether or not it was feasible to reverse that flow. That task had two specific goals: identifying whether or not it was feasible and understanding if water quality goals were able to be met within this project. Both of those questions have been answered, and that task is complete. Task 3 is the site selection component for the new regional AWWTF. And so we are currently almost midway through that task. What that involves is finding feasible and suitable sites in which to place a new facility that is within the Brevard County system. There are goals associated with that, of course, that really make sure that a site is suitable from a capacity standpoint, from a resilience to climate impacts standpoint, and where it falls within the county. The timeline for that task 3, as you can see here, incorporates multiple levels of screening. We're taking a very robust approach to understanding what sites will be included within that piece of the study. And then finally, the last task I have that is currently in progress is task 7, the utilities routing evaluation. And again, this one is looking at the routing and the pipeline opportunities that come with placing that new system component into the existing Brevard County system. And so we have started that, and we've completed a couple of our initial foundational steps. We've outlined that our next steps are going to really be verifying field conditions. We're going to be looking at pipeline corridor opportunities and confirming long-term resilience against sea level rise and against some of those climate impacts when it comes to pipeline routing. So that is a very brief overview of what the project includes and where we're at to date. And again, coming to you today, again, to do our due diligence today, the City of Titusville was mentioned in one of the first studies that identified some wastewater ideas.
Right.
And so we are coming to you today to start the discussion if the City of Titusville would like to participate in this study.
So let me explain a little bit more when we talk about participating. From a certain degree, there's a lot of attention drawn on this because of the impact of the space industry. Right now, for example, Space Florida's, we have a short-term agreement with Space Florida. So I want to, the participation part is almost a decision-making from the city of Titusville of if they foresee themselves participating as being a collective, as part of joining assets in order to form what could be viewed as regional, or if it's the prerogative of the city of Titusville that they are self-sufficient and they choose not to be a part of that. Because as this report is being prepared, and as Sarah mentioned, we're looking at December of this year, the documentation of this would be the mechanism of seeking federal and state level dollars in order to fund it. So that component is there. And we do understand that this being a presentation, we are not here to ask you or make a motion. I'm not even sure you can from a presentation, but we more wanted to give you an opportunity so at a subsequent board, sorry, I'm thinking county, but at a subsequent city council meeting, we could come back and get a vote with related to what the intent the city chooses.
First of all, I want to thank both of you guys for being here and presenting. I think it's very, very important that we try to plan ahead. And as if I remember my numbers correctly, Ms. Terry's back there, she'll probably tell me the exact numbers. But I think the last time we spent money on a wastewater treatment facility 30 years ago, which we just got done paying the debt off on, was probably about $50 million 30 years ago. So now you look at, could a city of itself spend $150 million or more to build a new wastewater treatment plant? Sounds pretty tough, especially in this fiscal climate. And I think it's more important now than ever that we kind of work together to find some common ground and keep exploring this idea, especially when I think council's all seen the work order changes and the amount of cost that we have just keeping Osprey alive and well. And so I think it's time that we as a council look at other ideas to maybe get off of using the wastewater treatment we have that was built along the lagoon many, many years ago and plan ahead. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. And again, really appreciative that you guys brought this before us. Member Nelson.
Thank you, guys. I was interested because our sewer plant is right on the Indian River. And if we have any rise in the river, you know, I think it's going to cause problems for us. I was also interested because we're working so hard to get everybody off the septic tanks. And we have all those septic tanks down at Port St. John. And that worries me. So it's almost like we're working really hard to get everybody off septic tanks. And 10 miles away, you have loads of people, thousands of people on septic tanks. One of the things that worries me is taking the pipes across the river. So, Sarah, this is your question. What are the risks?
Well,
How do we mitigate it?
so this was a conceptual idea amongst many that were proposed in the Phase 1 study. In order to do, and I know because that point's been brought, in order to, we're going through an entire evaluation, and obviously environmental is part of it. I will tell you, timeline is part of it because the Corps of Engineers just doesn't give out permits to do those. So, as I said, and I say this because Brevard County was not taking the lead in the Phase 1 study. So as we're coming in, because it was mentioned, it is being evaluated, but as I say, we're gonna let gravity take over, and the findings will show if it was a good idea or not.
Okay. So timeline, what is the timeline
Or
to finish the project? Say next November, December, looks like it's feasible, you have funding, what kind of timeline are we looking at?
Well, first of all, it's all about money. So,
Of course.
so the benefit and the structure of this Phase 2 study, because we've structured it in a format that not only would appease on a federal, like congressional Senate level, but also we're getting the Department of Defense associated with it, and we're looking at a state. So I don't have an answer. What we are doing is once we, and that's why I wanted to step in a little bit with what Sarah was saying is, this isn't just a participation, it's this is gonna be a documentation that's gonna be the roadmap of when we get our state and federal legislators that are asking us, what do we need or what do we want to do? This would be the roadmap to it.
Okay. So Eddie, I heard 10 years,
Oh, this is
at least,
at least,
which is why I was sort of like, 10 years from now, what are we going to need? And so maybe it's something we should look into, partnering with the county.
Well, and that's, again, this is a presentation. You all can have the further discussion on that, but at some point, and I'll coordinate obviously with the leadership here when we can come back and obviously get that decision-making on what you all decide, and then we can proceed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Nelson. Member Moscoso.
Thank you so much. I do think it's a really good conversation for us to be having. I do have some concerns. I know that this is just meant for us to participate, but it does feel a bit hard for us to say we will participate without having additional information. And so I hope that before we decide that we would have the information. I do have a few questions, and I know that this is just the presentation, but perhaps you could answer these. Let's say we do participate in a location is chosen for Titusville. Will we have the ability to accept or reject that site?
Say, if the site is located in Titusville,
Were we thinking it's not going to be in the city limits? It's going to be outside in Brevard County?
I mean, it could, I assume, because if we do any kind of land purchase with you, I suppose that would be a board, council item to.
Yeah.
And the site selection is looking in a large region within the county, not
in the city.
not
Okay.
specifically within the city of Titusville alone.
I mean, we're also looking, and I think what Sarah should have elaborated, because the word new kept getting used, a new wastewater plant. Another options that we're also looking at is how to capitalize on some of Brevard County's current wastewater plants and expanding it. So I don't want to put the emphasis that it's going to be new. There is, and as we're using, because the word regional sometimes gets overused a little bit, there is the need, and, for example, Port St. John, Brevard County operates the Port St. John wastewater plant. And there is a need for major upgrades associated with that. New associated with that may not constitute the definition of what we think of regional. Regional could be just a replacement servicing the Port St. John. So again, these are some of the things, and as Sarah said, we're at 50% with this. So, we're just, you're adjacent, you were mentioned, and, quite honestly, the space industry has not stepped forward exactly, so we have, whether I like it or not. So I hope that helps answer some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I do, obviously, we are adjacent, and I appreciate being a part of the conversation, but obviously, these are going to be questions that our residents
Absolutely.
have. And another question, I don't know if you'll be able to answer it, but let's say we become a user in this, will we be able to control any of our service rates, environmental standards? Do we kind of lose all control once we?
We haven't gotten to that level yet. Right now, we're just trying to determine, and again, I don't think none of this is contractual, okay? But if it's, but at the same token, we don't know what long-term planning the city of Titusville has. So it's to give a good indicator, and as we can, because you have to understand, if we know what the flows are, we know what the property we need. If you all said, yes, we're interested, or we would follow you along through this process, but at the end of the day, nothing's concluded until you sign something contractually.
Okay, and then my last question, you kind of mentioned that the space industry wasn't really stepping up.
Did I say that?
I'm maybe paraphrasing.
Yes.
So how can we make sure, and this is another, I mean, these are just questions we have to ask. This might be the only presentation I have with you, that this isn't going to fall on the taxpayers of Brevard County. The idea is that we're going to be taking some of their wastewater as well.
Yeah, and believe me, that is as someone who has been in several meetings, that has been echoed. So, and I think right now we have a good working relationship, especially on a short-term basis with Space Florida. We're getting to a good spot. Now the question is, what do they want to do long-term? And that's really the emphasis of what this report's going to get into.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, we all know that they do provide a great, jobs. There's so much that comes from the space industry, so we don't want to diminish that. But also, it would be great to see and to know before we become a user how much they're going to put in as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Cole?
I noticed in your presentation, you mentioned federal funds. Will this be a cost sharing? Well, if we are involved in it, will we share in the cost of this as is other communities within Brevard County? Or do you look at this as something that will be totally funded by the government?
Well, again, I would love to say that the feds are going to pay 100% of this. But the reality is, as we go through this process and we understand who wants to participate, and then we understand what the dollars are, we also have to keep in mind of what timeline we want to accomplish this. And so once we get to a point in this timeline, then there would possibly be, and I say possibly, there would be a cost share discussion on the stakeholders that would participate in this.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you guys being here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
City Manager?
Yes, sir. The last item is 4D, the Comprehensive Plan Evaluation and Appraisal Report. And staff will provide a presentation on the Comprehensive Plan Evaluation year update.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Make this brief so we can get on to the 6:30 meeting. This is a brief update on the evaluation and appraisal review, the year of the city's comprehensive plan. A little bit of background. So the year is the Florida statutes requires that the city review the city's comprehensive plan and evaluate it, make sure that it's consistent with any changes in Florida state statutes and that it's functioning well for the city every 7 years. And last year we completed that review and held public meetings in the summer of 2025. City Council provided the permission to transmit those changes to the state in October. And a couple months ago, at the end of January, the state provided completed its review and provided its comments. The status of the year, what the state found is that the proposed amendments conflict with Florida Statutes Chapter 2025-19, also known as Senate Bill 180, which, for those who are not familiar, relates to several named storms and limiting local governments from adopting regulations that are more restrictive and burdensome. Excuse me. Since then, our staff met with several of the staff members at Florida Commerce, the State Department, and had a very productive meeting. We understood that their process for evaluating the changes, they call it the cute term R&B, is they evaluate each of the policy changes, and if there's even one policy change that is R&B, the entire amendment, the entire year is considered null and void. And so it was returned back to us null and void, and I'll show you that on the next slide. This is an excerpt from the letter that we received from them. And basically it says that the city of Titusville is prohibited from proposing or adopting more restrictive or burdensome amendments to its comprehensive plan or land development regulations at this time. And for the reasons outlined herein, the city of Titusville's proposed amendment is more restrictive or burdensome, making it null and void ab initio. And so the next step would be to retransmit to the state once changes are made. In that conversation, they identified several of the policies as more restrictive and burdensome. One of those, for example, is Future Land Use Policy 1.5.8, which would have required Florida-friendly species in new development landscape plans. They said that was not something that you had in your comprehensive plan before, and because that was a new restriction, that was a violation. There were a couple other examples, but for the sake of time, I'll just breeze through that. There were some other policies that they said were potentially R&B, so this was a yellow light. And for example, Conservation Policy 1.2.6 would have developed an urban forest management plan to expand city urban tree canopy. And they said the development of the plan itself is not more restrictive and burdensome, but the result of developing this plan could have resulted in policies which would have been more restrictive and burdensome, and so caution. This could lead to R&B and hence leading to something that would be null and void. There was Senate Bill 840 that we had high hopes for. It had passed the Florida Senate unanimously. That would have made some changes to Senate Bill 180, or as it was added to Florida statutes. One of the changes is it would have sunset sooner. So whereas right now those limitations on adopting anything more restrictive and burdensome sunset October 1st of 2027, that would have sunset in June, at the end of June of this year. But unfortunately, there was no action in the Florida House and that bill died. And so at this time, our next steps are to tweak the language to remove any conflicts with the Florida statutes section that was identified and to retransmit the EAR to the state. And what that means is new hearings with the Titusville Environmental Commission, the Planning and Zoning Commission, and back to you all before we send that off to the state, Florida Commerce. So just wanted to provide that brief update for you on the EAR, and happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you for telling us all the things we can't do. But what is our timeline for public hearings?
We're making the changes now, so probably about 2 to 3 months.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Member Moscoso?
Thank you. So with some of the things that they had, is there any way that we can still work within the limits, like and get the intent of perhaps the policy that we wanted without completely getting rid of it?
There are, and so there were some key words that they identified, like prohibit, require. And so if they said if we can soften that language, we can, or otherwise just hold on to it until a later date when we can adopt something more restrictive. The other idea was they said that if we can prove that there was somewhere else in the comp plan or the land development regulations where that restriction was already in place, we can provide them that documentation and they will remove that comment from their staff report.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing none. Thank you very much, sir. All right, now I believe we're on to petitions and requests from the public. We're still at our 5:30 meeting. Mr. Johnson.
My name is Stan Johnson. I'm a registered professional engineer. And because I'm a registered professional engineer, I'm reporting to you of fraud and dishonesty by the city of Titusville. Of course, I'm wearing a little badge here about what happened in the election fraud. But my disappointment is that 4B, 4C, and 4D were only presented to this board without comments from the public. You failed to have public input on this. And your auditor he left. He just took off, and it's going to be voted on tonight. So I gave him a special correspondence that indicates that the city has been engaged in false fraudulent budgeting for about 59 years by ignoring needed millions of dollars for capital improvement projects as required by our 1966 Stormwater Master Plan and FEMA and engineering due diligence. The city has not even done any inspection of these waterways. And I've also reported that to our city manager and assistant city manager that Jim Herron, who was the former director of Public Works, what he had happened to him when he was doing budgeting with the city is the city manager said, you can't budget this stuff, a lot of the stuff. He had to reduce his budgeting again and again and again. So whether there's fraud is going on, especially from water resources regarding the Stormwater Master Plan. So I'm disappointed in what has just happened tonight, that the city is ignoring in their budgeting. They're ignoring millions of dollars for capital improvements projects that are supposed to been spent for like I said, the 1966 Stormwater Master Plan, FEMA, and engineering due diligence. So I wrote a note to this guy who did the auditing. I said, how do I report millions of dollars of financial fraud by city's auditor, to city's auditor, and how can I report millions of dollars improperly not budgeted by city for greater than 59 years? So you see, I'm explaining to you something that is very serious that I've been reported to you repeatedly again and again and again, and you don't do anything. So the city of Titusville, including especially our 4 councilmen right here, is you're supporting fraud with this budgeting. You're supporting fraud, and it's not right. It's not right at all. So I hope that you're prosecuted sometime.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you.
My name's Keith Edwards. I've been a city of Titusville resident for 40 years, a business leader, an employer, And I'm really disgusted. You know, we claim transparency, but yet there is coercion going on. This theft, I feel that it needs to have a forensic audit done on it. We need to know who got the money, where the money went, and start getting it back. I would like to see some nice shiny bracelets on people that walked away with my tax money. I am very upset. I'm upset about the election. I don't see how a man can freaking hide in the bush and jack his opponent and yet sit in that seat. I don't know how our city manager can put a police officer as the police chief, that he goes around making threatening phone calls to citizens. This has just gone crazy. I want to know what's going on, and I want something done about it. I mean, where does this stop? We have a mayor that I feel is a puppet. He's taking his orders from Robin Fisher. Now, Mr. Mayor thinks that he's a friend of our veterans, but yet he's a buddy with Robin Fisher. When I was awarded the NSP program for Brevard County, I had Robin Fisher sell George Taylor with the NVHS down the river on homes for our veterans right up here in Titusville. When does staff tell the employer what they're going to do and how they're going to do it? I am so disgusted with the 4 Judas. And darling, God bless you. I say a prayer for you every night. You keep it going. Because right now I'm ready to run for office and kick some of these bums right on out of this house. Because it's just way overboard. It's got to stop. I know, I feel, I can see that there is funny business not only in the water department, but it's also in the police department and maybe other departments. I've worked for the city of Titusville. I've worked as a subcontractor for the sewer treatment plant. And I've been a business owner here. It's gotta stop. We need people that are for the people, not for themselves. And I really, really am disgusted. So if you want to just cover this over and move on, and oh, it's only one department, I am sorry. The citizens of Titusville are fed up. I'm fed up. We need somebody to stand up. Thank you.
Before I start, out of respect to the people who watch from home, maybe you could change the camera angle so that people at home can see the speaker. I think that would be more considerate. Okay, Dr. Kathleen O'Rourke, Titusville resident, and I'm speaking tonight to express my strong support for the city conducting a full forensic financial audit. The recent internal audit revealed serious problems, including misuse of funds, misuse of P-cards, and missing city assets reportedly worth more than $1 million. Those findings are troubling on their own, but they should also serve as a warning. An internal audit can uncover important issues, but it also reminds us there may be much more we don't know. This is now being framed as a problem limited to one department, but the public should not be asked to simply accept that assumption. When findings are this serious, the responsible next step is not to narrow the focus. It is to follow the facts wherever they lead and determine whether these problems are isolated or whether they point to broader weaknesses in oversight, internal controls, and accountability. It's also deeply concerning there have been issues with people being afraid to speak up and a real lack of support for whistleblowers. When employees and citizens fear retaliation or believe their concerns will be ignored, problems do not get reported early. They stay hidden, they grow, and public trust is damaged even further. A city that truly wants accountability must also create an environment where people feel safe coming forward. This is why any further review must be further independent. To restore public confidence, this cannot be seen as a process controlled by the same internal structure that oversaw city finances for many years. This is not about prejudging any individual. It's about making sure the review is credible, impartial, and thorough enough that the public can trust the results. A full forensic financial audit would help determine not only what happened, but how it happened, why safeguards failed, whether similar problems exist elsewhere, and what changes are needed to prevent this from happening again. The people of Titusville deserve more than reassurance. They deserve transparency, accountability, and a clear commitment to follow the facts where they lead. If the city is serious about restoring public trust, it should authorize a full financial audit. When public money, public property, and public confidence are all at stake, the answer is not less scrutiny, it is more. And again, I think you're not being considerate of the people at home. It's not an ego thing. I don't care if people see me or not, but when they're watching from home, I think they would like to see the speakers, and that can be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else for petitions and requests? Seaman Baker coming up.
So the finance department, the police department, public works, and God knows how many other departments, obviously are having some issues. When pressed on public records, we've gone through now a water resources director, a city manager, 2 city attorneys, and I'm not the only one seeing this, obviously. Yes, Mr. Broom and Chelsea, if you were questioning.
I'm sorry. I was counting in my head.
So tonight's presentation about the audit here, I mean, it really feels like an attempt for you guys to kind of do the bare minimum, and I think that the people really deserve way more than that. For many, many years, our council has not seen internal audits, and that's a major problem. You guys passed budgets, but you didn't bother to see where the money was spent. So basically, you just didn't balance the checkbook. And that's a real issue, because you have a lot of people in your city paying taxes and paying attention, and they want good roads and infrastructure that doesn't fall apart. And we don't want to see you guys investigate yourselves. That's not okay. It's not an answer. It's not an acceptable answer at all, especially when you have numerous issues that have come to light and they are actual facts. This wasn't something that media made up or anybody on social media. Y'all lost a truck, a whole truck. I don't know how you do that, a whole truck. And that's not the only thing. Backhoes, all sorts of things, mowers. I mean, it was just a free-for-all in here and everybody sees it. So the only acceptable answer is that there is a full forensic audit on absolutely every single department in this city. We find every dime that has been spent and every single person that has been responsible or held those people up. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Oh, we're going to get to Ms. Shiflow.
City Manager, can I ask if you change, can I ask that you change the camera, please? City Manager? You're able to speak.
Member Moscoso, you don't have the floor. We're going to allow petitions and requests to get up. No.
Thank you, Ms. Shiflow. City Manager, I'm going to ask that you change the cameras.
If that's what council did.
Is there a
Let them see me.
motion? Like, you can't
look
just
beautiful.
direct the city
Thank you, they're
manager to
changed.
do anything. You know, you have to, have council support to direct city staff to do anything. Do you remember the rules? Ms. Shiflow, you have the floor.
Shiflow, Historic Norwood House. I want to speak on 2 issues on tonight's 5:30 agenda. I want to speak about the Space Coast wastewater. On slide number 9, page 15 of 44, under site selection, the phrase jumped out at me and scares me. Site selection, things to consider. Minimum regulatory. They want to put it someplace where there's minimum regulations on environmental impact and other impacts, blah, 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 blah. Enough said about that. I want to speak about our failed comp plan. Oh, our failed comp plan. You know what it failed on? Eddie didn't take the time to tell you. It was on crossings over bike trails. It was on native and Florida friendly plants used in our landscape. It was another thing about the urban forest being alarming, watch out, yellow light, he said. These are things that we've been trying to do for our city, for our environment, for the health of our population. And those two things just really jumped out at me and bothered me a lot. I suggest that we find a way to amend our comprehensive plan so that the state legislature, these people hate the citizens of Florida. Rule after law, after legislation, after ordinance that they pass is against the people that live in the state. I don't understand why people vote for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shipla. Seeing no other public comments, can I have a motion to adjourn? All right.
Mayor, before we adjourn, can I ask Mr. Abate a question or two? My question was, I understand that we lost or can't find something over $1 million worth of equipment and property. But over what period of time is that?
The independent auditor went back from 1970 to 2024, period of 54 years, and found inaccurate record keeping, poor asset management tracking for approximately 30 items that over 54 years had a value of $1.2 million. In today's terms, those items would have a residual value of about $80,000. There's no indication that there was any theft involved. Again, they couldn't prove anything back from 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's just very poor asset tracking.
Okay.
And we're instituting a number of internal control improvements to alleviate that issue.
And I will say that as a prosecutor, I tried to get police records back in 1980, 84, somewhere in there. And they were held at the old SunTrust Bank on Highway 50. And you walked in, and there were rats back there. And all the records that we had, that I could find, had holes in them. So when we go back that far, it's going to be difficult to figure out what happened. Second question, when this issue came up about the water department and one employee, well, two employees, he is being prosecuted, correct?
That's correct. He's already been arraigned, and it's currently in the court system for prosecution. And we're working with the state attorney to ensure that the city is made whole, and we've received full restitution, and we've recovered most of the property. So we are working diligently with the state attorney's office to ensure justice prevails and that we make the city whole.
Okay, so he has been arrested, correct? He has been arrested.
He has been arrested, yes, that's correct.
Okay. And as part of that investigation, was there an audit for the state attorney's office? Because that's one of the things they're going to want for the financial crimes.
We provided the state attorney's office with all the information we had. As far as whether or not they've conducted an audit, I don't have that information.
Okay. Would it be worth doing a fraud audit from our point of view?
Certainly, I would work with our city auditor to indicate whether or not that was on our next step and come back to council.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. Now I'll do a motion.
Member Moscoso would like the floor.
Thank you. Since you kind of opened the gate, I would say our internal auditor did recommend a forensic audit. And so that would be something, if we have nothing to hide, I think it would just be an act of transparency. I know those can be expensive, but I would love to see us look into that and what would that cost and what would that look like. I know we can't make a motion on that right now, but perhaps we can direct staff to look into what that would cost, what it would look like, and bring it back before us.
Member Stokel?
Yes, I had some ideas on that as well as some other things. My hope would be that we could discuss these things at the retreat, because I don't want to start giving them one item at a time without us collectively really brainstorming and seeing what is happening within the city. If there's other things as far as culture, should we bring in a consultant or an industrial engineer? Because I think that in addition to checking the forensic side of this, I think that we also need to look about, okay, if we do these things and we make sure that we have these certain policies in place, still, what is our culture? And is there a safe place for people to feel comfortable? So I guess my recommendation, and it is on the agenda later, that we kind of take that time at the retreat, which will hopefully be a whole day, for us to really figure out what direction do we want to go into as a city.
Thank you, Member Stokel. And again, we're still in the 5:30 meeting, so that hopefully we can get into our next meeting where we can take some action. Member Nelson?
Motion to adjourn?
We're adjourned. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back.